Welcome. I hope you're blessed in the Lord today. In this video, I just want to look at the context of Matthew chapter 24. Now, I'm doing a longer series on the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, and we're going in depth there, and so those are some longer videos. But I wanted to point out one issue that is so very helpful in understanding the context of this passage, because oftentimes it is very misunderstood because people are always thinking in terms of future events, things that are still to come. Now, in Matthew chapter 24 and the other passages, parallel passages, there are future events discussed, particularly the coming of Jesus Christ where every eye will see him. Okay, so that's a future event, something we're still waiting for that has not happened in history. But the context is very clear about what is being discussed immediately by the disciples and Jesus. And understanding this can help us quite a bit. Because what will happen is when people are doing eschatology, they start to connect things together very quickly. And so they'll see 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 about the man of sin sitting in the temple of God, and then we'll see Matthew chapter 24 about the Abomination of Desolation, and then they'll go and find something in Daniel, and then something over in Revelation, and they'll connect them all together like it's just this perfect system. But what we have to do is we have to deal with each passage individually first. We have to deal with the context first. After we understand the context of that passage, then we can see if it's appropriate to connect it with something that is very similar. An example of this is, where is the Antichrist mentioned in the Bible? Most people would probably say, definitely in Revelation. No, the Antichrist is not mentioned in Revelation. You say, well, okay, maybe Ezekiel or Daniel or in Matthew chapter 24. No. Only in 1 John is Antichrist mentioned. It might be also in 2 John. But only in 1 and 2 John is the term Antichrist used. And in that context, the primary use of it is to talk about false teachers in the body of Christ. People that are claiming to be Christians, but they're teaching things contrary to the doctrine of Christ. Now, he alludes to something that's greater than just individual false teachers. But I want us to see that oftentimes we'll make connections of things that are not necessarily true. We connect the beast with the man of sin, with the abomination of desolation, with the Antichrist, and maybe those things are to be connected, but we need to be very careful that we do it. We don't do it just because some chart, some fancy chart says that all those things are connected together and that makes everything make sense and it's all one big picture. No, we need to do the work of going to each passage and try to deal with it. So let's go ahead and look here at Matthew chapter 24, just the first few verses. Now, like I said, I've covered this. I'll try to put a link I've covered the context of this in a longer video form. But here, Matthew chapter 24, verse 1. Jesus departed from the temple and was leaving when his disciples came to show him the temple buildings. Okay, so this is what's under view. They were walking out away from the temple, and they're going up to the mountain. Actually, they're going up to the Mount of Olives. That's why it's called the Olivet Discourse. And they're going up there, and they're looking, kind of getting a view of all the temples and all the temple and all the buildings around it. Okay, that's what's happening. Jesus answered them, "Do you not see all these things?" Okay, what things? The temple that they're looking at. So this is the temple that was around before it was destroyed in AD 70. Okay, by the Roman armies. "Truly I say to you, not one stone will be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." So he's talking about these buildings, and he's talking about them being destroyed. He's not talking about somebody coming in and setting themselves up to be God and then ruling the world from a temple. He's not talking about that. He's talking about somebody that's coming that's going to destroy the temple. Okay, now there might be some foreshadowing in a future event of maybe some rebuilt temple and somebody's going to come and claim to be God and sit in that temple, a man of sin. That might all be true. But here in this passage, we need to recognize that that's not what's being discussed. That's not what's in view. It's not talking about somebody just coming in and being a false Messiah. It's talking about somebody that's coming to destroy the temple. Okay, so they destroyed the temple that they were looking at. Verse 3, "As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?'" So we see from this question, tell us when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age, that there's a couple things that are under discussion. So he's going to talk about the future. He's going to talk about the coming, his coming, and talk about new heavens and new earth. He's going to talk about the new creation, the judgment of the world. He's going to talk about things that are still yet to come in the future. But primarily, the first question is, tell us, When will these things be? What things is he talking about? When will this temple that we are looking at be destroyed? The temple, the complex, when is this going to be destroyed? And he'll go on, of course, to share this. He talks about this in verse 15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So he's talking about something that happened. Now we know when this happened. We know that this happened in AD 70. For years, a few years, they had surrounded and they had cut off Jerusalem and Israel from other lands. So Jerusalem was under siege. Okay, and so it was a bad time. People were committing cannibalism. They were doing all kinds of things because they were in a difficult situation. They couldn't get food, and they were cut off from the outside world. And this was the Roman armies surrounding Jerusalem. And here it says the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. He's referring back to Daniel chapter 9, verse 25 through 27. And he's giving us the interpretation for that. But in Luke, if we flip over here, again, I've discussed this before, but just to make sure that everything's kind of all in one place in each video here. Luke chapter 21, we see in plainer language what the abomination of desolation is. Verse 20, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that its desolation has drawn near. Now, desolation means what? Destruction. Whenever Jerusalem is surrounded by the armies of Israel, then that city is going to be destroyed. That's the sign that you know it's about to take place. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that its desolation is drawn near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and those who are in the city let those who are in the city depart, and let not those who are in the country enter it. So whenever Jerusalem was surrounded by the Roman armies in 67 AD, then the Christians understood what Jesus was talking about, and they made sure that they fled. They didn't go into the city. They knew that this was going to be a time of great destruction, and that eventually it was going to end with the destruction of the temple, which Jesus and his disciples were looking at when they started talking in Matthew chapter 24. So I'm not saying that in Matthew chapter 24, the second coming of Christ is referring to the destruction of Jerusalem AD. I'm not a preterist. I'm not speaking about that. I'm not saying that everything is supposed to be taken metaphorical or anything like that. I'm saying actually very literally. We want to take the scriptures and say that Jesus was telling his disciples that the buildings that they were looking at were going to be destroyed. When were they going to be destroyed? They were going to be destroyed when the armies surrounded Jerusalem. They weren't going to have somebody come in to just kind of set up themselves to be God in the temple. No, it was somebody that was going to come to destroy the temple, that not one stone would be left upon another. So it's important for us to understand that if we're going to understand all of the discourse, we need to understand this basic context. Otherwise, we will blur things together and we'll rely too heavily on charts instead of the context of each passage. So I hope this has been helpful to you. God bless.